afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, and welcome to this session on the role of information and communication technologies in Southeast Asia's post-COVID economic recovery. My name is Bart Hoogeveen, and I will be your moderator for this session. Our speakers for today are Ambassador Will Nankervis, Ambassador of Australia to ASEAN, based in Jakarta. Ms. Jocelyn Kang, Technical Specialist and Program Manager at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, based in Australia. Ms. Trisha Ray, Associate Fellow for the Centre for Security, Strategy and Technology at the Observer Research Foundation, based in India. And last but not least, Dr. Aida Karazanova, Economic Affairs Officer at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for the Asia Pacific, based in Bangkok. Before we move to our speakers and start with the meeting, I would like to express my thanks to the organizers of the Southeast Asia Internet Governance Forum, Kemko Kominfo and the Indonesia Internet Governance Forum, and all their staff who are making this event happen in these very challenging times. COVID-19, as we all know, continues to have a major impact on our daily lives, our economies, the way we do business, and the way we go about our social affairs. While no country is spared, we do see differences in how societies and economies manage to cope with things like movement restrictions, remote working and learning, and public health measures. But when this crisis is over, do you think we'll ever go back to a situation pre-COVID where we object to people calling in virtually rather than attending meetings in person? Where we'll have similar concerns, maybe privacy concerns about contact tracing and check-in applications? Will we object to kids learning from a screen or attending a doctor's appointment via a smartphone? Will we continue to prefer physical shopping over ordering groceries and products via an app? I don't think so. The restrictions imposed by the COVID health response have made digital technologies an indispensable part of our social, economic, and I think even our political lives. But not only that, our acceptance and our use of digital technologies have really manifested themselves as never before. And that begs the question, once the health crisis is over and we can start our efforts to restart and recover economically, how can these digital technologies play a role in supporting Southeast Asia's economic recovery? Over the last year, but even more so over the last years, many reports and studies have been conducted on the digital potential in Southeast Asia and in individual Southeast Asian nations. And some of you may have seen or attended only last month when the World Bank here in Indonesia published a 200-plus page report called Beyond Unicorns, Harnessing Digital Technologies for Inclusion in Indonesia. And that report, like so many others, observes a massive increase in internet use, but also highlights the remaining structural problems around the uptake of digital technologies, such as access, affordability, and quality of service. And my issue with many of such reports is what can be done? What can be done concretely, tangibly, realistically, and practically? And what can be done based on what's already happening locally, building on local initiatives, on local innovation? And where is support by and from governments and international assistance relevant, and where would it provide added value? And this is the subject of a current joint research project by my organization, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, in collaboration with the Observer Research Foundation, which was commissioned by the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So how can digital technology play a role in supporting Southeast Asia's COVID-19 economic recovery? What are examples of digital resilience and innovation that Australia and other partners can capitalize on to provide support to the region and by consequence expedite its economic recovery and make it ready for a digital economy, or as I think as we call it here in the region, the fourth industrial revolution. So I'm really happy that we have 4 speakers showcasing partly our research, but also showcasing what current efforts in the region are occurring at this moment in time. And before I pass the floor to our first speaker, Ambassador Menkesis, let me share very specifically our objectives and expectations for this session. And although it's called a showcase, we really see this session as an opportunity to have a consultation, to have a participatory dialogue with all of you, a true forum to express views, share examples, and debate issues. Throughout the presentations, we'll take time to enable you to feed views and examples into the conversation, so please be ready and prepared. Because by the end of the session, I really hope we leave the room inspired by good ideas, good examples, and an interest to continue the conversation in the months and years ahead. To engage with me and with the speakers, feel free to use the raise hand function in Zoom, the chat, and later during Jocelyn's presentation, also a platform called Slido to make yourself heard and to make sure that you can share your views and ideas. Finally, also for all speakers, please be mindful that this session is also translated between English and Bahasa Indonesia. So please be sure to speak clearly at a reasonable speed and to avoid too much jargon. So now let's move to our first speaker, Ambassador Will Menkesis, who is Australia's ambassador to ASEAN. And given the broad parameters of Australia's engagements in the region and in Southeast Asia, we're really looking forward to hear from you what Australia's interest is in this particular topic, but also what Australia's efforts are in terms of supporting the region in their economic recovery. Ambassador, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Bart, and thanks to ASPI and thanks to the organisers of this conference. So I'm Australia's ambassador to ASEAN. I'm not an expert on the digital economy or on cyber issues, but the main point that I'm keen to leave you with is the importance of these issues to Australia and our commitment to working with partners, and from my perspective, particularly ASEAN, on addressing and supporting recovery and the role of the digital economy in COVID recovery. And also working with India, alongside India with Southeast Asian partners to do so. So I'm very interested mainly in listening to your discussion, but I will, as Bart mentioned, focus on outlining some government policies and initiatives and priorities in the region. And I'll focus on three things. The first is regional economic recovery. The second is digital trade. And the third is cyber and critical tech. And then I'll just talk a little bit about Australia working with India on these issues. So first, regional economic recovery. So you don't need me to tell you about the challenges the pandemic presents for the countries of Southeast Asia, their governments, economies, social infrastructure, and indeed their people. But the main point that I'm keen to make is that Australia is really committed to cooperation with ASEAN and the countries of Southeast Asia to address them. We know that our long-term health security and economic recovery are closely intertwined with those of our regional partners. And our support for Southeast Asia's economic recovery is really wide-ranging, from cooperation in health and human security to support for the digital economy. So Australia is a really strong supporter of ASEAN. We're a strong supporter of ASEAN centrality, and we're a supporter of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And that outlook has really important principles that gel very well with Australia's vision for the region. And the outlook also provides for concrete cooperation under four key areas. And one of those is connectivity, and that's really relevant to the theme of today's discussion. We're also very supportive of ASEAN's comprehensive recovery framework. So in terms of our support, we've really ramped this up in the context of the pandemic. So last November at the ASEAN Australia Summit, our Prime Minister announced a landmark package of approximately $500 million worth of new economic development and security measures that will support COVID recovery in Southeast Asia. And this built upon a range of announcements by our foreign minister, initiatives worth around $83 million. And some of these areas of focus that are relevant to the discussion today, or this session, are economic integration, enhancing connectivity, and supporting ASEAN to navigate what Bart referred to as the fourth industrial revolution. Also supporting implementation of RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and Australia and New Zealand's free trade agreement with ASEAN, ANSFTA. So the Prime Minister announced a $46 million program to provide technical assistance and capacity building related to those agreements. And then also promoting digital trade and supporting inclusive economic growth through the ASEAN Australia Digital Trade Standards Initiative. That was an existing program, but we've provided additional support, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the second thing that I want to talk about, which is digital trade. So on digital trade, again, you don't need me to tell you that digital infrastructure is really transforming the way businesses operate and interact with customers. It's enabling lots of functions of government and enabling business to be more effectively deliver existing services, etc. Critical tech has the potential to promote inclusive growth, rebalancing economies, and opening up a new world of work. So Australia is really keen to work with like-minded partners to shape the rules of the digital economy in the Indo-Pacific, including through a regional digital trade initiative to foster digital interoperability, while pushing back against digital protectionism and authoritarianism. We continue to work closely with ASEAN to address challenges to digital trade across borders, notably through the initiative that I mentioned, the ASEAN Australia Digital Trade Standards Initiative. So we think there are huge benefits from aligning standards, including areas of data protection and privacy, cybersecurity, and cross-border data. And this Digital Trade Standards Initiative works through a range of mechanisms, but including capacity building workshops, research, and then certification-based training. I'm pleased to say that ASEAN is more and more recognizing the critical role that technology plays in regional integration, connectivity, and competitiveness. Digitalization, for example, is a real priority in the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. That's ASEAN's roadmap for recovery to map the path for recovery from the pandemic. And ASEAN's economic recovery priorities include a strong focus on healthcare, employment, and inclusivity. And ASEAN's designing and building new structures and approaches which are aiming to both support trust and measurement. So, for example, it has a new working group, the Digital Trade Standards and Conformance Working Group, which is focused on 3 pillars: digital transactions, digital logistics, and digital trust. And on measurement, there's also a relevant committee, the ASEAN Consultative Committee on E-commerce, which is focused on identifying the gaps we currently have in the ASEAN Digital Integration Index. So the idea is to help us identify where we're seeing impacts. So, for example, on things like, are there enough hospital beds? Are the right regulations in place to fast-track PPE, etc., etc.? So a lot of action on the ASEAN front on these issues, and Australia's right there working side by side and in a cooperative way with ASEAN to support. So back to Australia and other support, we're also working with different ASEAN partners to negotiate high-quality rules, such as those in the Australia-Singapore Digital Economy Agreement. And we're driving, as co-convener, the e-commerce joint statement initiative in the WTO. Australia also, of course, has a national digital economy strategy, which is a $1.2 billion investment in ensuring Australia has the technology, skills, and infrastructure to engage in the global digital economy. Australia is also actively engaged on digital trade issues through free trade agreements, including the ASEAN Australia New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, which I mentioned before, and its upgrade, and ASEAN-centered RCEP, as well as the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. So many of our free trade agreements not only include digital trade disciplines, but also cooperation and development assistance mechanisms to support capacity building on digital trade issues and make sure our partners are making them able to make the most of those agreements. We also see APEC as an important forum to support the digital economy agenda. Brings me to the third thing that I'm keen to cover, which is cyber and critical tech. So, of course, we need to remain mindful that the promise of technology comes with new risks. As our reliance on tech increases, the means to misuse it are also being developed. Australia's support for digital trade is complemented by our Cyber and Critical Tech Cooperation Program, which provides around $75 million to strengthen cyber and critical resilience across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. In April of this year, the Prime Minister also launched Australia's International Cyber and Critical Tech Engagement Strategy. This program aims to enhance the development and implementation of internationally recognised and industry-led critical tech standards at regional and national levels in Southeast Asia. These include awareness raising on the role and importance of standards, technical advice and assistance to align and implement international standards at a domestic level, supporting engagement and participation in standards-setting bodies, and standards-related research with a focus on Southeast Asia. Projects currently being supported in Southeast Asia include training by the Australian National University on the geo-economic issues inherent in critical tech standards, research by the Brookings Institution to better measure regional capacity to shape and implement critical tech standards, research by the Asia Society Policy Institute on the ethical use of artificial intelligence, data and systems, and data protection, privacy and regulations. And finally, a project by the ITU to enhance the development of standards and frameworks for critical tech. In addition, late last year, our Prime Minister announced a new ASEAN-Australia Political Security Partnership. This is a program that's designed to support ASEAN priorities and ASEAN-led initiatives under ASEAN's political security pillar, with a big focus on cybersecurity. And last year, under this program, Australia and Singapore co-hosted the virtual EAS workshop on regional cyber capacity building, with the subtitle was Seizing the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So that really focused on discussing the region's cyber preparedness, particularly in light of the accelerated adoption of cyber tech during the pandemic. Finally, and just to finish off, working with India on cyber and critical tech. So the Australia-India relationship is really going from strength to strength at the moment. We elevated it to a comprehensive strategic partnership last year, and both countries cooperate really closely and in close cooperation to advance an open, inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific region and an inclusive and rules-based trading system. And our engagement on cyber and critical tech, which is really burgeoning, is a key part of that relationship. The importance both Australia and India place on cyber and critical tech cooperation is evidenced by a high tempo of activities in this space in the last 18 months. And I'll just give you a few examples. Signing a bilateral framework agreement recognising both countries' leading roles in shaping cyberspace and critical tech, such as AI, quantum computing and big data. Committing to hold an inaugural foreign ministerial cyber dialogue in the near future. Funding projects to support Australian and Indian researchers to collaborate in this space under the Australia-India Cyber and Critical Tech Partnership, including work on an ethical framework for quantum technologies, privacy and security challenges for next-gen telecom networks, and ethical principles for managing critical tech supply chains. All three of these projects that I've just mentioned have the potential to help the region's prosperity and resilience in the year ahead. So, identifying practical opportunities for Australia and India to cooperate in support of Southeast Asia's digital transformation is a chance for DFAT and Australia to maximise our collective impact with partners, and of course to continue building Australia-India ties and our joint ties with ASEAN partners. So I really look forward to hearing more from Aspie and Joe, I think, on this topic shortly, and welcome further suggestions from everyone gathered here today on how we can further this cooperation. Thank you very much, Bart, and I look forward to hearing from colleagues.
Thanks, Mr. Bester. Thank you so much for outlining what I would say the fairly comprehensive and broad-ranging scope of Australia's engagement in and with Southeast Asia and with ASEAN in particular. It almost kind of triggers the question to me. It's like a maze of forums, working group, and some senior officers meetings that are taking place and addressing different parts of the theme that we tackle here through the conference, the digital transformation in Southeast Asia. Question to you, and if there's any questions from the audience virtually, and I just saw some nice shots from the audience at location as well. If there are any, please drop them in the chat box or take the floor when you can, when you're there at location. What would really kind of help Australia in this regard, kind of to find the right places to engage with ASEAN partners and help you in your work and your staff in trying to understand what's happening or what's buzzing in the region, which would inform policy making, not just at the national level but also at the regional level. What are the avenues for folks to kind of to inform the work you're doing?
Well, thanks, Bart, and you're right. It is a complex network of initiatives and mechanisms, but all guided by a pretty coherent objective, which is supporting regional economic recovery and supporting the kind of region that we want to see, which is inclusive and secure and open. Of course, you know, we're really interested in, and in my job as Australia's ambassador to ASEAN, Australia's sort of underpinning philosophy and set of priorities is supporting ASEAN's priorities. So we're very much focused on being guided by the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and supporting the priorities, including the digital priorities in ASEAN's comprehensive recovery framework. Of course, you know, so we're always talking with the relevant ASEAN bodies on what the priorities are under those key areas. And as I mentioned, it's great that ASEAN is really developing new mechanisms in line with the rapid digital transformation that we're seeing and the priority of these issues that we're able to liaise with and interface with through our programs. So I mentioned some of them, but in particular the new Digital Trade Standards and Conformance Working Group and the Consultative Committee on e-commerce. So it's great that we have the partners that are able to relay the sorts of priorities that are important to ASEAN. Of course, what we're most interested in, you know, in terms of informing that work is what are the gaps and what are the big opportunities. So those are the sorts of things that I'd be interested in hearing about from you and from participants of this session. And I guess with a particular view to what value add Australia can bring as a supporter of ASEAN, and then how we can work, importantly, how we can work hand in hand with India and with our ASEAN partners on addressing those gaps and seizing those opportunities. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Ambassador. And I think that's a nice segue into introducing our next speaker and let's say go a bit more into the depth of what we're talking about during this session about the role that information and communication technologies can play in the region's economic recovery. So Let us go to my colleague Jocelyn, who will take you through what hopefully will be a very interactive session, sharing some findings from our initial research, but also really inviting each and everyone online and at location to share their views, ideas, and suggestions for how we can move this piece of work forward. But Jocelyn, I'm going to pass the floor to you.
Thanks, Bart. I'm just going to set up and share screen here, but maybe in the meantime, Bart, if you can share the Slido link with everyone.
Yep.
Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Kang, and I'm a technical specialist at the International Cyber Policy Centre within ASPI in Australia. I am just so pleased to be here and so pleased to see so many of you have taken the time to join us. Really pleased to have this opportunity to both share and involve you all in this project. Those observant of you may have noticed a slight change in our title from post-COVID. I guess when we conceived this project, vaccines were coming out, and we were hopeful hopeful things would slowly return to normal. And I guess that's slightly changed our thinking from a technology's part in growth and regrowth to an aspect of technology's role in resilience. So a little bit about our project. Bart's gone through, this is both an Australia and India joint project sponsored by the Department of Foreign Affairs. And our aim was to discover areas related to digital transformation and digital adoption in Southeast Asia, where Australia and India could direct its efforts in support of the region's economic recovery. To do this, we were looking at the digital transformation journey of, to narrow the scope as well, so the digital transformation journey of Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, as well as India and Australia. So we wanted to look at, where were the successes, the challenges, the gaps, and the opportunities and the potential for shared learning. In terms of the outcomes for this project, and I guess given the economic crunch globally, and that there are a lot of big international multilateral collaboration with development agencies in providing for or investing in the region's infrastructure, we really wanted to look at more modest initiatives that can make a difference, as well as those, I guess, opportunities, which areas perhaps need a bit more attention. So, although this presentation is to share our work, it really is a lot more, I guess, a lot more interesting for us all as well, the more involvement that we have. So it's really to involve you all in this project as this showcase as a consultation. So we really love to hear your thoughts, and we have a few ways to do that. So there's the Zoom chat. I'll keep an eye on the Zoom chat, and with Bart's help as well. But we'd like to use this platform Slido for more of the engagement. So if you haven't already, if you can go to, I think, Bart, thank you for providing that link in the chat. So if you guys can go to that link, either to slido.com and enter in the hashtag SEA IGF, alternatively the QR code or directly the link, you should see a screen like this. And we'll mostly be inside this ideas section as well as polls. So the ideas is open the whole time. Polls will open and close as we go through the presentation. And look, if you, for whatever reason, don't have a chance to engage with us, or you don't feel it's sufficient enough, at the end of this presentation, there is also there's a Google form, so you can provide us with your details, and we can get in touch with you later if you'd like to engage with us further. So just in terms of the format for this particular presentation, I'll just give you a brief on our findings and our thinking, and then really get into more of the discussion and the interaction where we'll make use of those polls, those quizzes, those questions. So having a look at thinking about the digital economy, there are a whole bunch of frameworks, and we kind of pulled them all together. And the main themes, and what I want to draw you to attention to in this particular slide, the main kind of themes we kept on seeing were these enablers, so infrastructure, skilling, cybersecurity, and trust and safety. So national strategies, governance, and laws and regulations, thinking about standards, as well as content and services. And overall, I think the biggest one is inclusion, because the more people that can join the digital economy, the more prosperous the economy can be. And so I'd like to just give a small slice of our report. We will have a report coming out, and it will coming out soon. So we'll provide details of that. Or if you'd like to get in contact with us, we can provide you details of that and get you a copy when it comes out. In this particular example, I just want to give a kind of frame of reference, and sorry, well, I'll get to that. But what we'll focus on essentially in this particular small slice, probably these areas. So I think, so when we thought about these big key areas, I think inclusion and trust were really key to a prosperous digital economy. We'll touch on areas like affordability and community as well. So as a point of reference for this particular train of thinking is, we were like, okay, well, we have micro, small, and medium enterprises. We wanted to focus on this area because it makes up the majority of businesses in the region. And we thought, well, if you see these traditional offline businesses engage in technology in their business models, this will be a visible change. So the thinking around that is, what if, okay, so the pandemic, it's here. I can either, temporarily close my business because I can't transact with my customers anymore, or I could go online. So if I'm moving online, what are the considerations there? And it's this online presence. There are a range of platforms that a business could use through apps or create their own website. But there's also the idea of the element of payment. So how do I get paid for my products or services? How do I engage with my suppliers? And how do I pay my staff? And the other part of it is barriers. What are the barriers to this actually happening? And as we're thinking about this, one thing that came out of it is this idea of digital payments. I think digital payments are extremely important because it's one way to get more people engaged digitally in their daily lives. And it also hits the COVID element, because there are options depending on how it's done for contactless transactions, and not just contactless, but also transactions at a distance, so potentially remotely. If we look at, so what you're seeing on your screen here is data from 2019 on the left about card payment penetration, and you see it's in some countries it's relatively low. Visa did a study in 2020, and they definitely found that the uptake of digital transactions and a decline in a preference for cash has happened because of the pandemic. So I'm thinking, what's key to this? And what is really key is the human, right? It's like, how do you get humans engaged in this? And studies by Google have found that, in terms of the online finance, that's become particularly popular. And the reason for it has been that it was it was the same, if not easier, to transact financially. Sorry, easier than offline. Transacting online was just as easy as transacting offline, if not even more convenient. So that's why people were keen to take it up. So there's benefit, and it's going to be convenient and easy to use. But that generates interest. How do you generate ongoing interest? And I think a big part of that is community. So if you give someone a new product, that's going to be hard for them to handle, even if you support them, if there's not someone else they can talk to as well. So if they have a new product, this piece of technology, wouldn't it be great if the shop next to them also was using it? Things like that. But thinking also about what are barriers. So I'm going to step through this pretty quickly because I really want to get in and get engaged with you all. So some of the barriers, skilling, I think a big part of it, like I said, is trust. You know, there's a lot of cyber attacks going on. There's a lot of cyber crime, fraud. That diminishes trust. I mean, especially in the physical, you can hold hard cash, but you're now asking people to trust the ones and zeros that they can't see. Next is continual learning, and then technology moves so quickly that it's not just a matter of training people, it's ongoing training. Those are the difficulties there. So that's another key area, that it's not just, none of this is once off. The other element we're thinking about is, okay, so you have these people that are interested in the idea, there's other people using it, they've got some level of digital literacy, but you know, they actually still need to somehow connect. And so it's that middleware, that connection hardware. And it's great that this region is mobile first. So, you know, many people have mobile phones, maybe several connections even. But I think the focus should shift now to smartphones. So thinking about smartphones as a tool, because if it's a tool, then you're not just thinking about it as a communication device, but rather you could essentially run your business from this small computer, essentially is what it is. It has a variety of functions, so that means you can pay with it as well because of the radio functions within this device. But I guess part of this is about affordability. So unless being connected to the internet is affordable for people, that's still going to be a significant barrier. And one element I became particularly interested in, because it is quite novel. So when we think about the speed of connections, often we're thinking about, oh, we just need, you know, bigger cable, more capacity, right? But perhaps there are elements of the internet infrastructure as opposed to the greater telecommunications infrastructure, so the medium that goes across. Maybe there are other ways that we can speed things up. So I was very interested in, there were reports from UNESCAP about internet exchanges and how having local, as in national internet exchanges, meant that traffic destined for domestic locations wouldn't have to be routed internationally before being routed back domestically, thus speeding up the connection. I think a similar idea with the root DNS servers, and I think Vietnam is a good example of that. And another key issue, and I think this is it, are we thinking about inclusivity? So affordability comes somewhat into that, but what about bringing in the rural areas? What about bringing in more women, bringing more women online, and bringing female-led businesses online? So those are kind of like some of the key areas that popped out at us. Now, enough of me talking about us. The next bit is really about engaging with you all. So if you haven't already, please log on to Slido, and I see some ideas have popped up already. So what I'll do, there's going to be two slides here on inclusivity, one about the rural population and one about women. So as I'm going through this, I encourage you to submit your ideas in the ideas section of Slido or in the chat. So we're looking at this graph here. This is from Hootsuite and We Are Social. And what it shows is, so the ones in blue, so we took a focus area of those couple of countries. What it shows here is that, or what I want to draw your attention to is that Vietnam and Cambodia, despite these two countries having a small urban population, they actually have a really high internet penetration. So I don't yet know how the reasons for this, and I'd be curious. So if anybody has some insights to this, please feel free to write in on the chat. But I guess what I want to discuss here is what are some good examples of successful initiatives to bring the rural population online? What things have been done? So I'll give you a minute here to pop your ideas in the ideas section as I go on to the next slide, and then after that we'll have a look at some of these responses. So the other thing I want to draw your attention to is this getting women online. So this is about access, this is about education, teleworking, and business mentorship. So one of the things that came out of the Asian Development Bank's rapid survey of the area, I think it was the survey was about April, May in 2020. One of the things that came out of that when they surveyed people about what initiatives they would like outside the financial suggestions, one of the things that in particular female business owners wanted was assistance with teleworking. So we saw a lot of female-led businesses having to at least temporarily close down during the initial COVID outbreak. So my question is, how do we bring more women online, and how do we introduce technology into more female-led businesses? So let's have a look at what people have said. So hopefully you can see that on screen. So we have Rolly said, improve infrastructure and connectivity. Definitely, I think definitely this is, you know, I guess the difficulty is how, right? Because it's easier in urban areas to install infrastructure because economies of scale means there's a lot more people to use it, but to actually get it into rural areas which are further and the geographies may be inhibiting, that's what drives up the cost. But yes, definitely, if we can get more infrastructure out there. But maybe there are other ideas, such as providing free internet in community areas. So in that way, there's infrastructure at scale. That's an interesting one, Thomas. So Thomas talks about low consumer trust. And exactly right. That's why digital literacy is really crucial. It's that getting that base layer of, yes, I know that you know, going digital will benefit me somehow, but reducing the fear barrier, the fear of something new, the fear of, I think it's a legitimate fear of, you know, fear of fraud and cyber attacks as well.
Is that, Joe, if I may, how does that compare to the other kind of factor that I think we see being repeated over and over time? You mentioned that as well, that the uptake of kind of mobile phones and smartphones in the region is so high that everyone, I think even the World Bank report that I referred to in my introduction, says that those folks in Indonesia who have access to the internet and have a smartphone or connection are using it kind of, I would almost say excessively. And at the same time, we kind of keeping hearing these concerns about digital literacy and kind of hesitance to do online business and things like that. So how does that compare to how does that compare?
I think that's interesting. I think when there is that and we might come to it in the next slide as well. I think if there's that demand from people, if people seeing that it's convenient and useful, so there's a high uptake of e-commerce, but that doesn't mean that people are appreciative of the negative sides and the risks, the cyber risks involved as well. So we might come. Tell me if I don't hit it in the next slide, but I think we might hit it in the next slide. So I'd like to thank everyone who. Sorry, I couldn't go through all of them, but feel free. I believe the ideas will stay there throughout this presentation and up until tomorrow, actually. So if you have more ideas, please keep putting them in. So this next slide, so actually before I go on, this next slide is, you should be able to see it in, there we go. So if you go into your Slido and hit polls, this particular area will change depending on what slide we're on. So in this particular area, this one we came across by accident. What you're looking at here, this should transfer. What you're looking at here, this graph, this is data from UN's EGovernment Development Index. And what you're looking at is the three components that the UN has used to make up their e-government development index, which is human capital index, online service index, and telecommunications infrastructure. So we use this mapping. We use this visualization to just try and see. It was just interesting to see where the levels are. Would you expect that looking vertically at each of these countries, would you expect countries with high index of telecommunications infrastructure to also have high human capital and high online services? And generally that seems to be the case, except for we just by chance plotted India as well. So the dark blue colors are the countries in focus, the grey colors are the other countries in the region, and light blue is Australia and India. And what we found here is that India was definitely a standout. I don't think you can miss it. Essentially, despite having low index for infrastructure, it was very high in terms of online service index, which kind of made me pose the question, should we continue to focus on infrastructure or develop more services for the current infrastructure? So what I mean by that is, are we limiting who can be engaged by trying to provide the best and greatest online services with the newest tech? Or should we actually be focusing, like shifting our focus to be and developing maybe even web pages for like slower internet connections? So there were studies that found that, at one point, it doesn't matter how fast your internet connection is, if the inhibiting factor could actually be the technology used to build your websites, that they become sluggish and slow to download. So if I can get your thoughts on that, we'll shift over. Yeah, so Definitely, definitely. I mean, of course, definitely we'll need infrastructure, because without infrastructure and connectivity, um, there's no way you can get connected. So definitely infrastructure. But I think my point is it should be kind of shift that focus a little more. I think there's a lot here saying both, and I think there definitely needs to be both. And there's a good point that, the more infrastructure you have, yes, the services will follow. Okay, we're definitely going to both, but I think part of this is because, like I was saying with this, and please keep bringing your thoughts in. Just from the point of view of our project, I think we're seeing that infrastructure is really expensive. It needs to be in there. You can't have connectivity without infrastructure. For the purposes of our particular project, those infrastructure projects are massive and expensive. Although they need to be in there, are there other ways that we can help engage more people online, uh, bring more people at their current stage online, or engage more online? I'm just reading some questions here. Oh, yep. All right, so we have a few more, but could I trouble you for a time check? So
Yeah, maybe if you take another 5 minutes,
yeah, sure thing.
then move to Trish.
Okay. Yep, we're almost done here. This one, so also in your polls that are about to change, get you guys to jump into the poll there, and I'll read out the question in the poll. So we're seeing ASEAN initiatives promoting 5G, IoT, artificial intelligence, and the development of smart cities. So what we're really curious to know is, how important do you think that these technologies are to the development of your country's economic growth and recovery, with one being the most important? With one being most important. So we'll do a quick poll. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to do that if you jump in. And then I'll give some time for some longer answers. Oh, there are a lot of others. That's fantastic, folks. Keep bringing the answers in. And feel free, if you've voted already, feel free in the chat, in the Zoom chat, if you'd like, to give some long form answers, and we'll get to that. I'll probably give it another 10 seconds before we move on. So tell me, I mean, I think it's a close call here between 5G and artificial intelligence, and smart cities has popped up. I guess smart cities takes in elements of all of these things, right? But would people like to share why they chose what just talking about your first choice, whatever your first choice was? I'm going to close the poll, and I'm going to shift to the next one. If people would like to provide some long form answers as to why they chose what they chose. I found it interesting that, I guess, even though there are a lot of really basic initiatives that need to happen, like we're thinking about infrastructure and thinking about connectivity, not just as, connecting cable, but rather that reliability and affordability piece. So when I say reliability, I mean, it's all good to have an internet connection cable, but it's not great if there's a flood and the internet doesn't work. And thinking about affordability as that's part of the connectivity place. I think Philippines is a really, really great example where although there might be 4G coverage, I think there's about 70% 4G coverage in the country, but the majority of people are actually on 3G still. Even though the facilities are there, it's available to use, but people choose not to. And that actually comes down to affordability, so that the cost of 4G enabled phones, the cost of 4G data, that's inhibitive. And that's why people choose to stick with 3G, which is slower and there's less functionality that can be used through there. So we'll have to try and imagine how we wish to expand on this particular question. So yes, I think we can all agree that these technologies are very important. All right, this is our last question, and this is probably our most important question. So you can continue on with this. I'll give you a few more minutes, give you a minute more in there. Our final question. So will be a long form answer. So if we put effort into only one area, so you can only choose one area, in a particular Southeast Asian nation, which country would it be? Which area should we focus on, and why is that? So whilst you're thinking of answers for that, I'll quickly go through this. So I've got responses about 5G and smart cities as well, about digitizing businesses. Whoever put in this about fast connection, I'd love it if you could expand on why you think a fast connection will be beneficial. My personal take on this is that if you want to engage people with multimedia, especially in education, and we're doing these video streams constantly, that takes a lot of data, and you want to be able to, have a lot of these conversations. So finally, I've just shifted the poll. So if we could only choose one area, what area would that be? So if you can put in which country, which area, and why. So in terms of area, thinking, is it infrastructure? Is it about skilling and education? Is it governance? Laws and regulations and standards? Is it cybersecurity? Is it potentially the contents, the digital services? So what I might do is I'm going to leave this poll on, and provide you with our provide you in the chat if you'd like to engage with us further. So, oops. So I'm going to sign off here, but if you'd like to continue putting in an answer for this final question, we'll definitely get to it and read it. And further, if you'd like to engage with us after this presentation, please feel free to fill in this form and we'll get back to you. So signing off. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And thanks everyone for your responses through Slido and joining us on that adventure of using multiple platforms to get your ideas and feedback. And as Joe mentioned, yeah, feel please be invited to leave your details so we can touch base even after the session. And I think Joe, you will leave the Slido deck open as well. So while the next speakers are speaking, people can leave their ideas and suggestions behind. Thanks. I would like to move to our next speaker, to Ms. Trisha Ray. As I mentioned, she's working with the Observer Research Foundation in India and is working together with us, with ASPI, on this particular project. And we're just really keen also for the project, but also for this session, to get a feel for India's experiences and expertise when it comes to promoting digital development. Yeah, just very curious to hear what you've got to say, Trish. You've got the floor.
Thanks, Bart, and of course, thank you to ASPI for it's been a great experience working on this project and fascinating set of ideas to think through. And thank you, of course, to the Southeast Asia Internet Governance Forum for this opportunity to present our work. Joe captured in a very engaging way the complex ideas that went into the project. And she also talked about the curious case of India. I'll briefly talk about India's digital development experience and its challenges as well as ambitions in this space. So in 2014, barely 5 years ago, about 6 years ago, only 19% of the population had access to the internet, and only 15% had access to mobiles. By 2021, India's internet users numbered 624 million, which is equivalent to 45% of its population, as well as 1.1 billion mobile connections. By 2025, India is expected to be home to between 800 million to 1 billion internet users. India's digitalization push has a long history, but it coalesced into one major initiative in 2015. In 2015, the government launched Digital India, its flagship program to transform the country into an empowered digital economy. The initiative is a big tent. It covers everything from basic telecommunications infrastructure to citizen participation and digital empowerment and skilling. There are a few key ingredients to India's digital transformation. One is a foundational digital ID. The second has been a set of homegrown application programming interfaces, or APIs. The third has been something that India has in common with many countries in Southeast Asia, is the leveraging of mobile phones, especially in the absence of broadband infrastructure, to deliver government services. The fourth is the push to connect every single village in the country. And finally, impart everyone with the skills they will need to thrive in the digital age. I'll just talk about the first two. The other three were part of Joe's presentation, and I'll also leave them as part of the wider discussion at the panel. When it comes to foundational digital ID in India, we have something called the Aadhaar, which is in many ways the crown jewel of digital India. It's the national biometric digital ID that basically undergirds how the government is able to deliver welfare schemes, healthcare, etc. And till date, over 1.3 billion unique Aadhaar numbers have been assigned. So it's been a massive, ambitious project. The second ingredient that I want to mention is the homegrown APIs. So India's digital projects are backed by something called India Stack. It's a set of APIs that form the backbone of the country's digital infrastructure. And the implementing body is a mix of there's government stakeholders, there's also industry stakeholders and coders. So it's a joint initiative essentially. And the projects consist of 4 layers. The first is, of course, the biometric ID, which is called the presenceless layer. The second is the paperless layer, which is to translate all records and digital documents or all records and documents into the digital form to reduce the overall burden of paperwork. The third is the cashless layer, which is facilitating e-payments. And the final one, the most important one, in fact, is the consent layer, which is to provide a secure and the necessity of a clear and robust set of legal frameworks on data and cybersecurity. And then the second one is the importance of involving local stakeholders in project planning and implementation, especially in countries like India and elsewhere in Southeast Asia as well, which have diverse languages, communities, even physical factors such as terrain and levels of infrastructure penetration. To briefly illustrate the first point on legal frameworks, the creation of digital tools like Aadhaar is actually one of the triggers for the data protection debate in India. At its inception, Aadhaar was compulsory for any individual wanting to access welfare schemes and a host of other government services. The project initially sparked a lot of privacy concerns about the absence of clear opt-out pathways, as well as risks of data leakages, all pertinent concerns that many countries are dealing with. As a result, the project inadvertently served as an antecedent to several landmark laws and policies. So in 2013, for example, the Supreme Court ordered that not possessing an Aadhaar ID should not lead to the denial of government services, which is an important precedent. And then in 2017, Aadhaar triggered this judgment by the Supreme Court that made the right to privacy a fundamental right in India. And then in 2018, the Ministry of Electronics and IT submitted the draft Personal Data Protection Bill, which was tabled in 2019. It's going to be retabled in the winter session of Parliament this year. So all of these can essentially trace their origins right back to the inception of a lot of our digital projects. To conclude, keeping in mind the time as well, India's digital transformation story has, of course, been punctuated by ups and downs. Its remarkable growth, its ambitious digitalization projects, and the way that Digital India also captures the ambitions and aspirations of the country's large young population has been part of what has made the country a pivotal player in a range of new emerging technology coalitions and processes. So I'll end there and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Trish, for setting out what you call the curious case of India's digital development. I'll remind that description. Thanks so much for sharing those experiences. If there are any questions from the audience, again, feel free to post them in the chat. I might have one or two questions, if I may, Trish, unless there are any from the audience. Two things that I'm probably really interested in. So one is that you mentioned, or you actually stress the ups and downs in India's digital development process. And I almost start to wonder whether some of the things you mentioned about the requirement for an appropriate legal framework about cybersecurity and data protection, about the realization that you actually need to involve local stakeholders, in particular, I mean, given the diversity of the nation, has that only been possible because of the Aadhaar initiative being kind of introduced and kind of to expose that requirement? And if you would have to wait for kind of the policy setting to be there and for people to get involved, maybe that whole initiative would never get off the ground. So do you kind of sort of need to just push ahead with things and realize that you just don't have it all right from the start?
I mean, ideally, that shouldn't be the case. The issue with...
But in reality...
Yes, in reality. The issue is that, and I believe this is a challenge that several organizations, governments go through, which is that a lot of the information you need is in silos. So if you have a centralized decision-making process, they might not even know that, okay, there is this set of information and capabilities that already exist in this part of the state apparatus, but they might not know about it. So I think that has been a challenge, and therefore involving states and then local governance bodies from the start would avoid a lot of these challenges. But I mean, the fact that the challenges are being addressed now is better late than never, of course. I mean, Aadhaar has been one case, but we also talked about this in the paper. It is also evident in, for example, India's fiber optic connectivity project, BharatNet, which it began in the previous the one before that, in fact, in the two previous administration as this project to, it's primarily catered towards rural connectivity. So the aim is to connect each of the 250,000 gram panchayats, which are village level governing bodies, and they represent over 600,000 villages in the country at a cost of $6.2 billion US. It's of course an ambitious project, but as the project was implemented, it was primarily centrally driven. Barriers that were not foreseen initially, such as the impact of rains, the availability of like basic connectivity infrastructure, and I'm talking about roads, for example, in the areas that they want to lay the cables on. All of this basic infrastructure is needed to essentially lay the connectivity infrastructure on top of that. So all of this came as lessons learned afterwards. Another key lesson learned from the project was the need to involve industry early on as well. So you now have buy-in from a lot of private telcos in the country that they will commit to buying X portion of the BharatNet infrastructure to provide services over it once the project is done. So these are some key post-facto learnings that have come from the projects.
Great, thank you. Maybe that's a nice bridge to one of the questions posted in the chat by Amira, who's asking...
Recording in progress. Recording stopped.
Someone's trying to record us, but I think it stopped again. So Amira is asking, what do you think are the challenges that Southeast Asia could expect when utilizing information and communication technology as part of kind of economic recovery, given that Southeast Asia is still experiencing the constraint of infrastructure?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I was just a bit of it broke off.
Yeah. So what do you think the challenges are or can be expected for Southeast Asia when utilizing information and communication technologies, given that Southeast Asia is still constrained by a lack of infrastructure?
Yes, I mean, again, the curious case of India perhaps provides some example for that. But as many of the participants in the previous presentation noted in some of the answers they gave to Joe's questions, is that some of these short-term bridges, like the mobile first idea, are only short-term bridges. They cannot be a long-term solution, because broadband is not just about user experience, it's also about helping the development of industry applications. Like, you can't do IoT over poor connectivity infrastructure, for example. You need something as low latency and fast as 5G to be able to implement that. But in the interim, Digital India's projects are very much focused on being able to reach people who might not even have smartphones, for example. So a lot of the applications or or the services are delivered over SMS, for example, instant messages instead of applications per se. So that level of adaptability in the implementation of projects serves as that bridge. So you are including the less connected populations from the start as well. It's also key to include them from the start because it is also a key element of trust. You can't suddenly walk in with this big ambitious project and expect people to just buy into it. So having that level of introduction to these services and then building up the infrastructure, I think that would be one way to go about it.
Great, thanks. It's interesting that you mentioned mobile first as a short-term objective and not something that's kind of will have kind of that lasting effect unless you kind of proceed with the next steps following up from mobile. Just a question here from Alton, who's asked and I think it's also related to a question I wanted to ask. So you talk about the involvement of local stakeholders, the role that the young population has played in kind of driving the digital uptake in India. But how can kind of, let's say, the youth community, academia, and industry work well together when they all have kind of their own particular interests and ambitions? Are there any kind of examples of how folks in India have been able to work well together?
Yes, I mean, a part of the strength of having different stakeholders is that you get sometimes very divergent sets of interests onto the same page. So that diversity is an asset in itself. In India, the government has sought to really involve civil society and industry in its digitalization projects from the start. For example, Aadhaar, the foundational ID, and I even mentioned how India Stack is like a collective of industry and government folks, as well as independent coders. But like Aadhaar, the project was led by one of India's most prominent technocrats, Nandan Nilekani, who founded Infosys, one of our tech giants. So he's the one who led the project. It was his expertise behind it. And then we've also seen an increasing level of consultative engagement with civil society in India. For example, with the Personal Data Protection Bill, the last draft, which received quite a bit of pushback from civil society and industry, there was an open system of feedback on the bill, which we hope will be integrated into the draft that will be presented in the winter session this year. We've also seen similar levels of engagement, say, at the Ministry of External Affairs, New Emerging and Strategic Technologies Division that was set up earlier this year as the nodal body for India's technology foreign policy. And they have sought to build like a node and spokes system of consultations. They're a very lean division, but they rely on consultations with industry experts, with civil society, with think tanks to really feed into the work they do. So that's been a few ways in which they've been involved.
Great, thank you. And I think I mean, here in Australia, we've seen kind of almost an overkill of government trying to consult with all stakeholders and people just getting tired of being requested to submit a consultation request again. But I think we see the idea, the value of seeking input from academia, from the private sector, and from others across the region as well. I think even Indonesia opened up consultations for their national cybersecurity strategy late last year, earlier this year. So yeah, I think those are all great examples of how this collaboration and exchange is progressing. Thanks, Trish. I don't see any more questions, but if there are any from the audience, again, feel free to put them in the chat. I think this is working well and nicely. And with that, I would like to move to our next and final speaker, Miss Aida Kavzanova, and she's working with the UNSCAP, which is the UN Commission for Economic and Social Commission for the Asia Pacific. Sorry for all the abbreviations. And one of the areas they've been focusing on as well is kind of how to support digital transformation, not just in Southeast Asia, but in the broader Asia Pacific. So thanks, Ida, for joining us from a remote island in Thailand. Really grateful to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Bart, dear colleagues, Your Excellency Ambassador, and our colleagues from civil society organization from Australia and also India. I would like to share my heartfelt salutations for this wonderful event, and thank you for inviting us. And I have an honor also to share the ESCAP tools that we have offered for the region. I want to share a few slides. So how can I do that? So if I press share screen, okay, I have it.
That should work. Right. Yeah.
I think it will.
Just wait a second. I'm not sure whether we've lost Ida here. If the control room could maybe jump in there. Control room, are we back? Are we all still there?
But maybe in the meantime, as we wait for Ida to come back online, and hopefully when she does, she'll just jump back straight in. I could perhaps go through some of the responses from the questions we were asking. So I'd ask the question, if we put effort into just one area to make the biggest difference in a Southeast Asian country, which country would that be, and which area? And I guess by area, I meant like infrastructure and skilling, cybersecurity, etc. And why would this be? So this is some of some people's responses. I won't share screen here, just so that it allows Ida to come back and share her screen. So a response here talking. I feel that there are a lot of people from Bali online, which is fantastic. And essentially, yes, we have you know a lot of Indonesia came up a lot, and I think that's to do with our audience as well. But skilling. So, and one particular answer talks about working like in I think what they're trying to say is that in Bali that the country working with volunteers giving digital skilling, skills training. And I think that's a and I think that's a really interesting point about volunteers, where there's a community. So for cybersecurity, that if you think about the certs, it is very much a security community, and there's a lot to do with. I think a lot of the assistance is not necessarily for profit. There's a community built on central interest. So they're suggesting that it's volunteers who are providing these digital skills training. I believe Ida's back online. So Ida, if you jump back on, if you can, oh, she's, sorry.
Meet her now. Yep.
Yeah, she's coming in. She's coming in now. Ida, whenever you're ready, please jump back online and share your screen.
I think you're back, Ida.
Thank you so much for your patience. It's just to illustrate that how many people can be connected and disconnected in this world, and what is the role of ESCAP. So we actually, ESCAP is Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and we are dealing with different economies. So Southeast Asia is actually one of the 10 economies that we are now supporting. And I wanted to share a few slides to illustrate that. If you give me another minute, I think I will be successful. In the meantime, let me also highlight that the digital transformation is quite a difficult process, and it is actually defined as a nationally planned promotion of digitalization of the whole society. We are talking about whole economy, and in this regard, digitalization itself is defined as the application of digital tools and technologies to government, business, and consumer economic and social activities that result in new working arrangements. So I would like to highlight new working arrangements for each. For example, e-government platform, businesses, pay-as-you-go, cloud computing, streamed entertainment, business models, and social media. We just have heard how successful India is using a whole society approach and different policy making tools, starting with broadband, having access to e-participation through the digital registration. It's quite a great phenomena. And then connecting rural and urban. So all of these cases are quite interesting to learn from. At ESCAP, as I mentioned, we look at the policies, and our policy entry points backed up by the trends, the current trends. So if you look at the economic grouping, Southeast Asia is quite an exciting group, with Indonesia being ahead in inclusive digital economy. And this meeting in particular, why I'm very happy to look at the content, it's actually trying to address the missing link with public sector. So these engagement opportunities that we have, and opportunities to raise questions and collect and harvest ideas that can be further scaled up at the local and regional level. In summary, the digital divide in the region continues to widen, and the broadband access, even the challenges of 5G network deployment, are coming to the difficult terms because of COVID. And one of the questions from the audience was, what are the challenges during the recovery phase? And here we would like to highlight that ESCAP is looking at the risks and risks of pandemic, and not only. And then just recently we issued a report on cascading risks that are happening. So from the one hand, you can address through early warning some measures through risk prevention, and also you can do the preparedness and adaptation. But from the other hand, another risk is coming. In this regard, the IT sector and ICT sector is really challenged with the infrastructure. So Joe, your question is absolutely rightful. So do we need to invest in infrastructure, or do we need to improve the services? If I manage to share my screen with another effort, then I will show you a few slides. I can see that I'm in control, but all right, this one. Do you see now? Okay, great.
Yes, that worked. Thanks.
Fantastic. So I will start from the beginning and scroll through. You don't have to read it all now. I will just show you the scope of the work I'm sharing with you. For example, we mentioned that 5G network deployment. We know that 18% points had fewer connections during pandemic and impacted 5G rollout. And here we have another slide. Also, Joe mentioned we have done a number of research of different frameworks and look at affordable and unaffordable infrastructure services. This is overall picture of internet user gender gap. And you could see the well-developed and developing countries, they vary in the data from 2013 and 2019. And then it was amazing also to listen the case of Philippines, where the women are more connected regardless of their infrastructure development opportunities. So what do ESCAP do? The biggest framework that the ESCAP has for the region is this Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway Initiative. It is mandated by Asia-Pacific member states, and now we are entering the last year in 2022 for implementation of Asia-Pacific Information Superhighway Master Plan. There are 4 pillars on infrastructure connectivity, internet traffic network management, e-resilience, and broadband for all. As Joe mentioned, we do have an interesting project on ICT for quality internet in Pacific Islands. We also look at the ICT co-deployment with transport and energy infrastructure in selected countries in North and Central Asia, and we do policy experimentation through different sandbox. So these are the 4 pillars that we are looking at, and all the research and the meetings, policy dialogues are happening around that. The new dialogue and the new working group arrangements are happening now along 3 main pillars on digital transformation, digital data, and connectivity for all. So ESCAP Commission, which is consisting from member states at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs level, is run through a mandate by the committee. And now we are setting up a working group that would look at these 3 pillars. The steering committee will also look at the member state different chairs that would be leading this work in different sub-regions. So member states, for example, for working group chair 1 on connectivity would also be reporting and sharing the experience on digital transformation and digital data from other working group meetings. Relevant to Southeast Asia meeting, I would like to highlight one of the meetings we had at the expert group meeting level, where we try to utilize ICT and innovation in connecting rural farms and urban markets in Thailand. So you may acknowledge some of the outcomes of the report and the policy interventions that has been done by Thailand government later maybe. Yeah? So I would like to highlight just a few toolkits, 3 of them that we are now launching, and this is a very good opportunity for me to share with you these toolkits. One is on ICT co-deployment portal, which is looking for partnerships for broadband connectivity in energy and transport infrastructure. So it's an online tool, which is also backed up by simulation models. So infrastructure owners and policymakers can actually calculate different scenarios of connecting energy and transport infrastructure in different countries and also the cross-border level. We also developed an e-resilience monitoring dashboard, which is looking at different risks and looking at the different ICT statistics from the policy perspective, from the ICT role in setting up new systems in data management, and also on the infrastructure as a physical foundation. All of this in the background of hazard and exposure. For example, the share of disasters in North and Central Asia, as you could see, by number of occurrences are quite high. And then we worked with policymakers in Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Kyrgyzstan to see what are collaborative actions are needed to harness technologies against pandemic. And then there are some interesting observations from a glance you can find from the dashboard, where we placed actually the hazard maps. You can find out what's happening to Southeast Asia on another page. Here is one of the 10 pages. And also we look at internet speed maps. Today we are highlighting the issues of digital economy. And then the digital economy is coming with a platform-based approach, and we look at the technologies and the new phenomena of internet speed and also efficiency of economic linkages are highlighted. So in this regard, this is another interesting dimension. We visualize the opportunities through speed maps, and they display the mobile connections for the region. And this is the speed maps for Southeast Asia. You can actually observe East and Northeast Asia and the differences between countries. So in summary, I would like to highlight that emerging technologies such as digital identity and big data offer unprecedented opportunities that has been already highlighted by Indian case and others for building resilience, including empowering people. At ESCAP, we look at GIS-based mapping. They're free, available for public, and we can actually map the critical infrastructure that serves the most vulnerable populations during disasters. We also look at cross-border connectivity through enhanced regional internet exchange points, IXP data, and data centers in Southeast Asia to boost the digital economy and the inclusive region. I have a couple of examples from Korea and Japan showcasing how they deal with digital infrastructure through fiber optic cables and what is the government approach is being used from the policy perspective, where three ministers are united to deal with broadband connectivity, and they have certification system. And also Japan has a very resilient ICT infrastructure using aerial cables, which were susceptible to greater damage than the buried cables. Another example is Philippines again. We look at the ICT from the very comprehensive disaster risk reduction framework, where the prevention measures, preparedness, response and recovery has been addressed through e-governance approach as well. To summarize, if you want to study more IDS research papers that we have been able to launch this year, I have like few slides to showcase the cover pages of these publications. So we finalized the assessment of the resilience in pilot countries. We also propose a procedural manual, and we also look at e-resilience from pandemic recovery perspective. Another interesting toolkit on ICT deployment, where we look at different scenarios and also calculation results. And I would like to thank you, and let me know if you have questions. I would be very happy to answer you. Thank you. And one more time, thank you very much for beautiful forum and opportunity to speak to the beautiful audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ida, and thanks so much for sharing lots of the great work that you and ESCAP is doing. And in the chat, I shared the PDF version with all the participants so they can read through your presentation at their own convenience and at their own speed. So thanks so much for sharing that. And I think the work that you guys are doing, I think the point you made at the start is I think really a valid one, is how to link what's happening kind of on the ground, what's happening in lots of the technical agencies, and link that with the policy environment and how making this all relevant for policymakers, decision makers, and our leaders in our own nations across the region and also at the regional level. So thank you so much for that. Even though there is kind of still 25 minutes on our timer, I got a nudge from the organizers that we have about 5 minutes left, which I think is correct since we had a bit of a late start. So I will do my best to wrap up our meeting. Unless there are any questions from the audience or comments from the audience, which I have not, which I don't see at the moment. So I'll draw it to a close. When we started, we obviously learned from Ambassador Nankervis about Australia's efforts in this regard and Australia's efforts to promote generally the uptake of new and critical technologies and promoting cybersecurity in the region as part of a broader effort to promote stability and safety in the region, but also to enhance and support where possible Southeast Asia in its economic recovery once the immediate crisis of COVID is over. Then we heard my colleague Jocelyn talk and seek inputs from all of you as part of our common exploration in terms of what's happening out there, what do we see is making an impact, and trying to kind of articulate some clear examples of good practices that we see happening, maybe at the very local level or at the national level, that we take as an example and that we take advantage of. And also, I think her presentation showed that it is an exploration and that we're really trying to see what is relevant for policymakers and for providers of international assistance. Where is it that we can make a tangible difference and positive impact with potentially small investments here and there? So we'd be very keen to continue that conversation also after the conclusion of this session. So don't forget, if you want to leave your personal details in the Google form. Maybe Jocelyn, you can paste it one more time in the chat. Then we heard from Trisha about the curious case of India's digital development, and I think you highlighted a couple of really important aspects in terms of how do you look and how do you approach a digital transformation process, and kind of the challenges and the ups and downs that are inherent in such kind of a what can be a very disruptive process, economically, socially, and maybe also kind of in terms of national governance. And very, very happy that you were able to share some of the lessons learned from India. And then finally, Ida, thanks for sharing the work that UNESCAP is doing, looking at kind of at the Asia Pacific as a region, which includes South Asia, which includes North Asia, but also Southeast Asia. And I'm happy to hear that Southeast Asia is a priority region for UNESCAP, for the Commission as well. And I think you play a very important role in providing lots of resources to policymakers and to experts in the region. So thanks for sharing that. And I was happy to share those slides with you in the chat. With that, it's 5 p.m. for me here in Australia. Sun is almost setting. It's getting a bit darker in my room. I was very happy to see many of you online. I'm even more happier to see people in the audience in Bali. So thanks so much for being with us. I hope you enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed all of the presentations and the statements and the information that was shared, as well as the feedback provided through Jocelyn's Slido polls and questions and ideas generating machine. And finally, I would like to, although he left already, I think Ambassador, oh no, you're still there. Ambassador Nankafis, sorry, you're still there. Thanks for your time and for being with us. And finally, I would like to thank the organizers, Kemko, Kominfo, and the Indonesian Internet Governance Forum for organizing this first ever Southeast Asia Internet Governance Forum, which I hope will continue in the years ahead. And I think organizers, correct me if I'm wrong, we would like to just do a kind of a photo moment with kind of the traditional Southeast Asian waving and smiling at the camera. Correct me if I'm wrong. Otherwise, let's do that now. Thanks everyone for your time. Thanks for this interesting conversation, and hope we see you all soon, online and offline. Take care.